Let's jump right in. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring a truly monumental event from 1986 right in the heart of downtown Cleveland. Now, this was a day that kicked off with the most spectacular, high-flying intentions you could possibly imagine. But, as we're going to see, it ended in a deeply tragic irony. We're looking at this incredible moment in history where immense city ambition just collided head-on with the unforgiving reality of nature. So, the big question we're tackling today is this. How did a charity fundraiser, an event literally designed to save a city's reputation and bring people together, somehow become a fatal disaster? We're actually going to skip our usual agenda today because the way this whole mystery unravels, it's something you really need to experience step by step. We've got a story here with an incredible, yet completely devastating twist.
Part 1. The ambition to rebrand.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand how this all happened, you have to look at what Cleveland was fighting against back then. They had this really rough reputation that earned them the nickname the mistake on the lake. City leaders desperately wanted to shed that image, right? They wanted to prove they were a world-class city. So what's the strategy? Well, the United Way came up with this wildly ambitious plan called Balloonfest. Since Disneyland had just set the world record for the biggest simultaneous balloon launch the previous year, Cleveland decided, hey, outdoing Disneyland is the absolute perfect way to rebrand.
And that sheer ambition led to a staggering goal: 1,500,000 balloons. Just wrap your head around that number for a second. The overwhelming scale of this operation is almost unimaginable. It required 6 full months of planning. They had to actually construct a net the size of an entire city block just to hold them all down. And it took thousands of dedicated volunteers hours and hours to manually fill every single one of those balloons with helium.
Part 2. Two timelines collide.
Let's move forward and see how this builds, because while downtown Cleveland was buzzing with all these final preparations, a much darker story was brewing just to the east. On the night of September 26th, a severe thunderstorm rolled through the area, prompting a severe thunderstorm watch. About an hour before the storm actually hit, 2 men had gone out fishing on Lake Erie. Now, by the morning of the 27th, the exact same day as Balloonfest, these 2 men were reported missing by their families. Authorities found their boat completely abandoned on the lake and suspected they'd fallen overboard in the severe weather, which immediately triggered a massive Coast Guard search and rescue operation. Meanwhile, completely oblivious to this life-or-death struggle out on the water, over 100,000 people gathered in Cleveland's public square that afternoon, just eagerly awaiting this massive balloon launch.
Part 3. A short-lived spectacle. Down in the square, the organizers were thrilled that the previous night's storm had cleared out. But nature definitely had other plans. They suddenly found themselves in a massive logistical trap. Over 1 million balloons were fully inflated, trapped under this giant net, and completely ready to go. But as the day wore on, a major rainstorm suddenly started closing in fast. And because of the massive scale of what they'd built, rescheduling at this point was near impossible. I mean, you can't just uninflate 1.5 million balloons, right? So, backed into a corner, they made a really fateful decision. They released the balloons ahead of schedule, just to try and beat the storm.
And honestly, initially, the launch was a spectacular moment of triumph. 1.5 million balloons rising into the sky created this awe-inspiring, beautiful scene. The massive crowd was cheering. It was a tremendous victory for the city of Cleveland. They successfully broke the record and proved they could pull off a world-class spectacle. But, as you might guess from the storm clouds gathering both literally and figuratively, this triumph was incredibly fleeting.
Part 4. The sky falling down. Now, what's really interesting about this is the unexpected physics of the severe weather shift that took over. Normally, helium-filled balloons float up, they slowly deflate, and they just gently return to Earth one by one over a really wide area. But instead, this combination of cold air and oncoming rain acted like a giant hand. It immediately pushed tens of thousands of still inflated balloons right back down toward the ground in absolute droves. The result was mass chaos on the ground. The wind quickly carried massive quantities of these balloons straight to Burke Lakefront Airport. Within minutes, the runways were so completely clogged that all flights had to be totally suspended. No way around it. The balloons also descended on city streets, completely blinding drivers, which led to multiple car accidents. It actually reached a point of absolute absurdity and danger, where roads literally had to be closed down until a bulldozer could arrive just to clear the balloons out of the way.
Part 5. A fatal needle and haystack.
But the chaos on the roads and the airport runways completely pales in comparison to the tragic collision of our two storylines out on the waters of Lake Erie. And the numbers here brilliantly illustrate the sheer scope of this disaster. Organizers had originally projected for maybe 10% of the balloons to land on the water. Instead, an unbelievable 60% of those 1.5 million balloons landed directly in Lake Erie. A massive, colorful blanket descended right on top of an active search and rescue grid.
This situation for the Coast Guard became utterly impossible. One rescuer described the nightmare, and their words just hit so hard. They said, "It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack here. Can you imagine trying to find somebody floating out here, or even spotting a life jacket with all these balloons on the water?" It is a deeply tragic irony. The very PR stunt that was meant to elevate the city was actively blocking a life-saving mission. 1 million brightly colored, bobbing orbs on the water surface made it visually impossible for helicopters and boats to spot a human being or an orange life jacket.
And that leads us to the tragic conclusion. On September 29th, 2 days after the balloons were launched, the Coast Guard finally had to call off the search for the 2 missing fishermen. Shortly after the search was abandoned, both men's bodies washed ashore. The direct impact of the city's ambitions severely hindered a desperate rescue effort when literally every single second counted. Part 6. An unintended legacy. So, the crucial point is, Cleveland did achieve its goal of creating a spectacle to rebrand the city, but it left behind a very different, deeply unintended legacy. They actually did get their world record. Balloonfest was officially featured in the 1998 edition of the Guinness Book of World Records, but because the outcome was so incredibly disastrous, creating mass chaos and hindering a fatal rescue mission, that was the only edition to ever include it. Shortly after, Guinness recognized the inherent danger and ended the category of balloon launching altogether.
It leaves us looking at an event that was supposed to prove Cleveland wasn't a mistake, but which ironically became one of its most tragic errors. So I'll leave you with this. What is the true cost of chasing a world-class spectacle when it collides with the unpredictability of nature? It's a stark reminder that ambition, no matter how well-intentioned, can never truly control the elements. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.